Hello, YouTubers. It's Joey here, and I have the honor of having a very special guest today. Not only is this man an accomplished author, having written several fiction books involving astrology and non-fiction books, of which I have here two of them, both Parivartan Yoga and Kalasarpa, which are very well researched astrological texts, which I recommend you look at. This gentleman is also a scholar and a practicing Jyotishi from Hart De Fouw's lineage. Not only that, if that weren't enough, he is also a fellow Canadian, so I'm excited for that, and also a fellow guitarist, and he also hails from the Canadian Maritimes, which is where I'm from as well. So we have a lot in common. So Alan Annand, welcome to our channel today, and I'm glad to have you here.
Great, Joey. Good to be here too. Let's go.
Good. Yeah. I wanted to talk today about the importance of Sampradāya, or having an established lineage, or learning or researching from an established lineage, because you come from Hart De Fouw's lineage, who in turn comes from Mantriji, who, well, we'll talk a little bit more later on in this interview. But more importantly, like one thing that I always wanted to find out about you is, you know, we both come from the Maritimes. You coming from, I think it's Bathurst, New Brunswick. Is that correct?
Yep, right.
Correct. So I was just across the bay from you on the Gaspé Peninsula. I was able to see Bathurst across the Chaleur Bay. But, you know, it's sort of an unusual location for, you know, a person to get drawn to Vedic astrology. So I'm curious to know your journey, how you know, I think you started with Western astrology and then you sort of moved into the Vedic world, and then how you came to find your lineage. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so, you know, in terms of lineage, we both know that there's not many gurus in the Maritimes. Even though they call it God's country, it's hard to find gurus there. You don't know where to start. And it was also the era to pre-internet, where you couldn't reach out too easily. I mean, you really had to meet people in order to get acquainted with others. But yeah, when I was living in New Brunswick, and went to University of New Brunswick, and I think that a book on Vedic astrology crossed my path during those years. I hate to date myself, but we're talking late 60s, early 70s. And there were lots of Indian foreign students in our residence just down the hall from me. And one of them had a book on Vedic astrology, which I borrowed for a bit and couldn't make head nor tail of it. Basically gave it back to him. Although I remember this guy, his name was Mohammed Farooq. He was from northern India. He was actually from Kashmir, now that I think of it, and he knew how to draw a basic astrological chart in the North Indian style. And I remember him drawing my chart and saying, basically, you will have an ordinary profession. I said, well, to hell with that. And I didn't want to hear any more of it. My interest was not piqued by that book, nor by my experience with him. Anyway, years later, when I was living in Ottawa, I was in a bookstore one day, and it fell off the rack and into my hands. This paperback book called A Time for Astrology by Jess Stern. It was like $3 in the day, but what a magnificent find, because it basically had all the calculation routine in that book, plus sort of a consolidated ephemeris, and all the interpretive principles, you know, planets and houses and signs and aspects. Well, I bought that book and went home that weekend, and I bloody well inhaled it that weekend. And over the next week, drew my own chart, and the chart of, you know, family members and girlfriend and whatever. And I was a goner as of that moment. And then so I started buying Western astrology books and reading more and more. And people would say, well, you're deeply into this, like, hey, do my chart, read my chart. And I'm like, oh, you know, I don't know how to do that. And so I realized that self-study, I mean, as smart as you might think you are, and with all the books at your fingertips, learning from books is almost mission impossible. And yet it's the way many people have learned, both in Western astrology and subsequently in Vedic astrology. Anyway, flash forward a couple of years, I realized I needed to study formally. And I Long story short, I ended up taking a correspondence course with the Faculty of Astrological Studies in England, which was a 3-year correspondence course. I did 2 years via correspondence, and then I moved to England for a school year, same city as my tutor, and kind of accelerated all my studies. And at the end of that year, wrote like 16 hours worth of examinations and got a diploma from the British Faculty of Astrological Studies. Came back to Canada, settled in Montreal for the first time, basically plugged into the local astrological community, announced that I had a diploma from the British Faculty of Astrological Studies, and everybody said, well, like, wow, you might as well be our teacher. And so right away I started teaching courses, 2 a week, basically on basic and intermediate astrology, and did that for about 5 to 7 years. Subsequently became the North American correspondence tutor for the British Faculty of Astrological Studies as well, and continued on that vein. Anyway, ended up having a pretty active practice in Montreal, and it spreads from that to other parts of Canada and North America. But I was also becoming a little bit cynical with what Western astrology could do. I thought, well, I'm smart. I've really dedicated my efforts to this. I've taken a formal course. I've read every book, and I believe I understand everything. I know everything under the sun. Okay, that's a little bit of ego talking, right? But I know everything under the sun about Western astrology. So why can't I predict like I think a good astrologer should be able to predict? I gnawed over that for quite a while. And then I thought, well, Vedic astrology seems to have this reputation for prediction above all else. And lo and behold, my birthday that year, girlfriend of the day, gave me a book, James Braha's Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer. And although I look back now on that book as, having multiple flaws, still at the time, it was an excellent introduction to the subject. And I dove into that. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. Although I did have a moment of hesitancy where in my chart, Western astrology, I've got a stellium in Aries, I got a Leo rising, I got a moon in Sagittarius. As you know, converting to sidereal has its pitfalls, where I saved most of my Aries stellium, but my ascendant became Cancer and my moon became Scorpio. And my initial reaction was like, no, it can't be me, please. But anyway, I stuck with it. And I went, yeah, this is nailing me better than I think Western astrology did. So I did what a lot of other astrologers never do, is I said, you know what? I know nothing. I'm going to throw away everything that I have now and I'm going to start all over again. Zen mind, beginner's mind. I went to a conference in California, ACFA conference in San Diego, met a bunch of people, came home with software, Parashara's Light, and a suitcase full of books. While I was there, somebody said, oh, you're Canadian, you must know Hart De Fouw. And I said, Hart who? Never heard of him. And they said, well, he lives in Toronto, you live in Montreal, can't be that hard to find him. Okay, file that away, we'll see. So I come back home with all these books and I start studying away on my own. And as you know, when you study on your own, you accumulate more questions than you have answers. It's mind numbing. As your education grows, your ignorance seems to grow with it in a parallel. Anyway, so I started reaching out to find out where Hart was too. And I found, okay, yeah, he's in Toronto. And I got coordinates for him. And I said, I want to go for a consultation. His wife writes back, Hart's not seeing any ordinary people anymore. He deals with big businessmen, Maharajas, that kind of class. She didn't use those words. Those are my words.
Okay.
Anyway, not seeing any new people, ordinary people. I wrote back. I said, I insist. I'm an astrologer. I've been, formally trained in Western astrology. I'm getting my, cutting my teeth on Vedic astrology. I got a million questions. I got to see how this is done. Help me, God. Okay, come. So I went to Toronto and went for a consultation, and that was a revelation. That's all I'll say. And so I said to Hart, "This is good. I mean, if you ever teach anything, please let me know. I will come back." So 6 months pass, and I get an email saying a weekend seminar in compatibility. So I'm there, and there's like a dozen other people. Maybe that's it. That's all. And a weekend with Hart, it's like, oh boy. This guy's not only a good astrologer, analyst, consultant, he's also like a brilliant teacher. I've never been with anybody like this before. All right, this is wonderful. I'll sign up for even more. What's next? Well, 6 months, 9 months pass, then I get another email. Hart is now embarking upon a trilogy program of courses, basically what he would call the foundation, intermediate, and advanced courses, built on a foundation which says the first thing that you need to learn as an astrologer is yoga vichara, recognizing and interpreting yogas in the chart. The most fundamental thing you can do. The next thing, the intermediate course, amsha vichara, the analysis of the multiple amshas and vargas in Jyotish. And then the third was bhava vichara, which is analyzing, placements of lords in houses and the various patterns they might form, and how those are germane to informing you about various things within context, character, personality, health, but primarily relationships and career, the two big things that every client wants to know. I always say to students, if you can master, providing an analysis and advice on the level of relationships and career, you're going to fulfill 90% of the need that clients come to you with. So it's job number one. Anyway, so after these these extended courses with Hart, each of which was 6 weeks long in residence in Albuquerque, New Mexico, being in his presence, well, they were like 4-day weeks, I guess, and then 3 days off and then 4 days back on. It was awesome, to say the least. He's just such a brilliant teacher. These were wonderful classes. They were like 30 to 40 people in each class. And it was such a rich community that was created, and friendships that have lasted me, for 20 years plus. But in what he demonstrated in class, what you could do with Jyotish was nothing short of amazing. And of course, during all these courses, he was constantly alluding to this mysterious figure in his past called Mantriji, his guru, his Indian guru, that he'd met in Toronto and studied with him, like one-on-one, like a Marine boot camp of Jyotish. He's told me stories, which I can't share with you in a public venue, about the rigors that he, Hart, had to go through under the duress of, study and memorization and things that he had to do, from diet to daily, weekly behaviors and mantra and memorization of Shastra and manipulation of numbers and regurgitation of facts and so on and so forth. It's, most of us would not be capable of it. And over a sustained 14 years, it's nothing short of incredible. Anyway, so with that kind of input from a brilliant teacher, and I got to say this, Hart has always said, don't be a one-trick pony learning just Jyotish. Go out there and learn palmistry, learn Ayurveda, learn Vastu, learn Nimitta, which is omens. And he says, feel free to sample anywhere you can, find the best teachers, go where your mood, your inclination, or your intuition draws you to learn more and more. He encouraged us to find other teachers. Here's the irony. After you sat in a class with him for weeks, you can't find another teacher who is comparable. You cannot. And I have tried, just taking his simple advice. Go sample others, learn from others. I've done my best in that regard, and there's no comparison. So I tell you, it's my good fortune. Thank you, God, for throwing me into his path, or vice versa, whichever. I'm very grateful in that regard. So, in terms of lineage, I'll say this quite frankly, and I've said this to a number of other people, if it weren't for Hart, I would know nothing. Well, that's not literally true, because I would know something, because I've studied books on my own and I've taken courses from other teachers. But what's important, the nut of things, the importance of things, the hierarchy of things, the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things, the things not to do. I've learned all that from him. And without his his experience and his insight and the guidance from his own guru, who schooled him mercilessly in pretty much everything, the right and wrong way to do things. I have learned, by following his advice, and a lot of us have. I mean, Hart literally had hundreds of students in this very rigorous program. Not everybody has gone on to a professional practice. I mean, a lot of people learn it for their own, personal reasons and are not interested in ever doing it for hire. But many of us have done that, and of course, the more experience you gain, the more you appreciate. I got this far thanks to a teacher who showed me the way. So I will be eternally grateful to Hart and to Mantriji as well. Hart originally himself started out with Western astrology. He was a Montrealer, and while he was a student at McGill, he got into Western astrology, and he quickly gravitated, however, to Vedic astrology. I'm not sure about the whys and wherefores, but perhaps similar to me, that he learned that Vedic astrology had offered the promise of brilliant predictions. And it's what draws a lot of us to astrology, which is ironic because with a lot of Western astrology today, it's devolved hugely, and it's become a kind of a psychological counseling thing where, you can be anything you want to be if you just want it bad enough. It's become a kind of a Tony Robbins school of astrological philosophy. Whereas, Hart's fond of saying Jyotish has teeth and it bites. And sometimes it bites you by saying, no, you're never going to be rich. You're going to have an ordinary life, or you're doomed. Like a good consultant never says things so bluntly, but Jyotish can say, you know what, between Jyotishis, this person's prognosis for relationship is pretty bad. They might never get married, or if they do, they'll never be happy, or they'll never have children, or whatever. Western astrologers, I think, often like to believe that if the client wants it, you can find a reason for it to happen in the astrological chart, where Jyotishis are a little more hard-nosed about that and say, well, okay, here's a pro forma to go through, tick, 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 tick. How many boxes get checked in this? Not happening. So you have to say to the client, sorry, maybe that's not going to happen. You have to find the right way to do that because you're learning Jyotish is not being given a mandate to be cruel and ruthless with your advice, which could be mistaken. I responded to somebody's Facebook comment today about, they were saying, astrology is a science because, there's a pro forma for doing everything. And if you follow that, you should end up with the same results. And I was writing back saying, really not so. It's as much an art as it is a science. And what I said was that, a chart is a static thing. It just is. It's a piece of paper with a diagram on it, and you and I and a dozen other people can look at it and see that same thing there to be seen. Lord of the first is in the 8th, Lord of the 7th is in the 12th, etc., etc. But we all bring different perspectives to it. We bring different education to it. We bring different experience to it, and we bring a different inborn talent to it and an intuition. And I don't claim to have any amazing talent or intuition. I think I have just, natural abilities, the sort of thing that helps me want to be an astrologer, but it's been my education first and then my experience in doing the right things that have, created a kind of a safety net to also to say, okay, this is the way my intuition, or first my logic and then my intuition will guide me. But again, this is thanks to Hart and thanks to Mantriji, who first taught him. I'm fond of saying that Western astrology is like a lake, and you could sail across it in a little sailboat in a day. But Jyotish is like an ocean, and it is incredibly deep, and the waves can be very high. And unless you have a very good ship and a navigation system and lots of food and water to get you across, you might never get to the other side of it. I did naively say at one point in my life, I believe I know everything about Western astrology. That was ego talking, but that ego has gone now because, and having been exposed to Jyotish, I can say frankly, I know I will never, never, never know it all, despite having given already 25 years to it, and how many more years I have available to put into it. I'm never going to reach the end of it. Hart, on the other hand, well, I don't know if he's reached the end of it either, but if you prompt him with a single, what we call a pari prashna, like a pivotal question on a technical subject, it's like, okay, man, sit back, get comfy, because this could go on for hours, this answer. And I don't mean by that to suggest that he is, somebody who's just likes to hear the sound of his voice. It's literally like opening up an encyclopedia and going at it. Here's everything that is to be known about it. And it's not just academic knowledge. He knows all that stuff, but he's got the experience to back it up too. He's done all this stuff. I mean, he credits his success to the power of his prashna readings. Yeah, ironic, given that, you think most people's bread and butter is going to be, Jataka, natal chart analysis. And, but he's done brilliant things with Hasta as well, too, and given courses in palmistry and in Vastu as well, too. And has had major industrial projects utilizing Vastu alone to engineer these things, or to be the guiding principle in the layout of things like major international hotels, shopping malls, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he is really what you call a kind of a polymath, in the sense that he knows all these Vedic arts. He is truly, in that respect, a seer who knows all these things. In India, well, first in North America, if you say you're an astrologer, the lay person, one of the first things they're going to say is, oh, you're an astrologer. Well, look at me, guess my sign. That's the level that, astrology is appreciated by the public in Western astrology. In India, if you were to announce that you're an astrologer, the listener might just as well say, here's my hand. Tell me what it means. And a Western astrologer would say, what? Like I said, I'm an astrologer, not a palmist. But in India, where the Vedic arts are just one big spectrum, for you to announce that you're an astrologer and yet profess an ignorance of the elements of Vastu, Ayurveda, Hasta, or anything else is to betray the fact that you've had an insufficient education in the Vedic arts. It's all part of one. I mean, Hart, like I say, if you prompt him on anything, he can, go off for an hour or two very easily. But it's courtesy of encyclopedic knowledge and a world of experience at a very high level of interaction, being paid, very high consulting fees or retainer fees for projects, business initiatives, and so on, involving millions of dollars.
Right. So for all intents and purposes, Hart, from what I understand, I've never had a direct relationship with him, but I believe he's now sort of retired somewhat. But it's clear to me from, having attended some of these conferences and meeting all of these people that, that are veterans within the world of Vedic astrology, of the legacy and influence he has left behind, which is massive. His book Light on Life has opened the door for many a student, and by all accounts, such as the one that you just provided, he is an incredible person. Now this sort of leads me into the next bit of the conversation, which is this the illustrious and somewhat elusive Mantriji. A lot of the listeners here may not know too much about him, and I know that you've had some personal interactions after building that relationship with Hart De Fouw. You eventually got to know Mantriji on a personal level, and I'm wondering if there's any experiences that you can share of being with him, because aside from Andrea Olivera from Ayurveda Rituals in Toronto, she wrote a great book which features a lot of snippets from different people, such as yourself, of their anecdotal experiences with him. He was quite a remarkable being. And, I'm just wondering if you can maybe, for the benefit of listeners, maybe share one or two stories about, the type of Rishi that he was walking amongst the populace in Toronto not too long ago.
Yes, he was a remarkable man, and I have to be careful of the stories that I want to get into, because frankly, it'll make me emotional, and I don't want to cry on YouTube. So I'm gonna constrain this to a certain degree, but he evokes that in me and in other people that have been close to him. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about his past, and it's not like I have an exhaustive command of his biography, but he was born in northern India prior to the partition of northern India when it became part of Pakistan, and he was part of that population that had to, uproot themselves and move further south in India. And there was a lot of, sectarian violence that was encountered during that displacement. In his youth, he was very fond of wrestling. When he was always a strong man right up until his later years, but in his youth, he was incredibly robust, and he was a wrestler, and apparently a very good one. But he was from a good family, and he, with sufficient finances to provide a good education. And he did train to be a lawyer, although he never did practice. Because what overcame him in the years of his legal studies was his older brother was his only, his an elder brother had and a younger sister. And his brother was into astrology, Vedic astrology, obviously, very seriously. I don't know who he studied with, but apparently he was a consummate practitioner. And when Mantriji was not studying law, he was studying Jyotish with his brother and becoming very competent in that. To give you an idea how competent his brother was, his brother used to tutor Dr. B.V. Raman in elements of predictive astrology.
Wow.
Anecdotally, apparently Raman was not all that apt a student or that apt an astrologer in that regard. Raman's fame resides, for the most part, upon being the publisher of the Astrological magazine, which was a staple in Indian bookstores, and especially railway bookstores, where it was almost mandatory that you had to have a copy of this for your train ride, which was maybe scheduled to take 1 hour, but could end up taking 7 hours. And, God help you if you didn't have something to read on this, long journey. Anyway, so Mantriji's brother taught B.V. Raman and many other people of the day. He died tragically in a car accident, a traffic accident. But before he died, he taught a lot to Mantriji. One anecdote I'd like to share, and this is it's alluded to, I think, in one of Robert Svoboda's Agora series of books about going to the track, or the racetrack, the horse track, armed with astrology and picking winners. And they would win routinely, but they would never keep the winnings for themselves because it was not good karma to do so. And so they would give their money away to the poor people, homeless and hungry. But it was just an exercise, an intellectual exercise, proving how astrology can be used for something as mundane as winning a horse race, never mind all the other things. So Mantriji went on, he just, completed his law studies, never practiced, launched into being a Jyotishi in Delhi. And he became, one of the most renowned Jyotishi in Delhi. But his his guru of the time at a certain point, his name was Hari Haran, and his guru said, you're done here. You need to go to America, where you will find a student worthy of you, to whom you will teach Jyotish, who will in turn spread Jyotish in the West. And like Mantriji is like, wow, leave India, North America, cold winter, are you crazy? I don't want to. His guru said, is your destiny, you go. So he went, and, sort of 2 years of putzing around in, well, not putzing around, but being in Toronto. There's the story. One of his clients was attached to the Canadian embassy in Delhi, and said, well, North America, Canada, USA, if you want to go to Canada, I'll arrange the visa for you, just like that. And so it was a path of least resistance. Mantriji said, okay, send me there. So he went, arrived in Toronto, not speaking English, but plugged into the Indian community, which was substantial back then, and of course still is. And very quickly, just by practicing what he knew, he became virtually famous in the Indian community. He would give lectures, give satsangs on the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, and there would be limousines outside waiting, competing to pick him up and take him to their place for a banquet or to indulge him in some way or other. People would write him blank checks to give them advice, to give them upayas, to arrange their daughter's marriage. He was just, he could do no wrong. They would invite him to parties. He would go into the kitchen with a cleaver. He would chop up melons or watermelons, and he would do readings out of those. I mean, aside from astrology and palmistry, he could do anything and everything, and he knew all kinds of magic things. I mean, one day one client's child was choking to death, uncontrollable sneezing, coughing, gagging, or whatever. Mantriji said, go to the front lawn, grab a handful of grass, come bring it back to me. Client comes back with a handful of grass. Mantriji sorts through this handful, picks out one nice leaf of grass, spits on it, plants it on the forehead of the child. Right away, the child goes quiet, settles down, no more coughing, sneezing, gagging, done. Almost like magic. I mean, there are sort of like a gazillion stories like that. In the early years when Hart met Mantriji, Hart had been looking for Mantriji, looking for a guru and not finding. He would go to New York, Boston, Chicago, always asking Indians on the streets, do you know Jyotish? Can you teach me anything? And sometimes they'd know a little bit and he'd exhaust them in a weekend or a week or whatever. So he was always on the hunt for somebody who really knew their stuff. Meanwhile, Mantriji in Toronto, looking for this student that his guru had sent him for, is not finding that student. All, in the Indian diaspora, all their children, are studying to be engineers, doctors, or lawyers. Nobody wanted to be a Jyotishi. He's thinking, where am I going to find this student? Anyway, long story short, they meet each other one day at a party, and then it goes. And in the early days, Mantriji was showing his powers to Hart to show that he was the real deal and that, he had a siddhi. And he would do things like, okay, Hart, when you come for class tomorrow, pick up a bunch of flowers. This was in a very rough years when Hart was like almost literally penniless. And it was really on a pro bono basis. But Mantriji would say, bring me some flowers. So Hart would arrive with some flowers in his backpack with some stuff in it. And Mantriji would take the flowers and he'd pick all the petals off and he'd sort them into piles. And he would say, okay, based upon this, in your knapsack today, you have 6 articles. And Hart would say, well, yeah, I think so, you're right. Mantriji said, no, empty it out, let's see. So you dump out his contents of his knapsack. There would be 2 books, 1 notebook, a pen, a pencil, and an apple. 6 items, bingo. Later on, when Hart started to generate his own clients, and he would actually have money in his pocket then, he would show up, and often Mantriji would say the same thing. Today, pick up a couple of flowers before you come. Bring them to me. Get the flowers, he'd take the petals apart, separate them into piles according to some logic, and he would say, today, in your wallet, you have $21.18. Hart says, well, I think I got 20 bucks. No, let me see. Empty the pocket, count the money. Tick, 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 $21.18. He would do remarkable things like that, just to shock Hart, if he ever doubted, to shock him into awareness that he was in the presence of somebody who knew stuff, who had a clue. One day, with Hart and his wife, he said, if you meditate and do mantra and lead a pure life, you will access information the like of which you cannot believe. He said, for instance, let's say I wanted to know this Saturday's lottery winning number, the 649. Well, let's say it would be, and he rattles off 6 numbers. Now, Hart didn't write them down, but he thought he remembered them. And on that Saturday, just out of curiosity, he checked the newspaper and, oh my God, there were the 6 numbers.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm prepared to believe that. I mean, on the evidence of so many things that went before. But I mean, he cared not a whit for money, Mantriji. He lived in very, very Spartan circumstances. If you were to see his room, you would say, my goodness, don't you need anything other than a coffee table, a single chair, a bed, and kitchen utensils? Is that it? Is that all? He could have been wealthy because he taught Hart how to use complex techniques like Sarvota chakra to, to do stock market analysis. And Hart's going to use that with many other clients. He could have used it for himself, but that was not what he was into. He was into pure Vedic knowledge. And in later years, he gravitated. I mean, he did his 14 years with Hart, and that may have been, the purpose of his life. In a grand scheme of things, you could see that maybe that was the most noble purpose, as directed by his own guru. And after that, he began to segue into more of a Jadu Krishnamurti kind of figure, a philosopher guru. And his heart then went to satsangs on the Bhagavad Gita and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and teaching Sanskrit and stuff like that. Yes, he would teach some of us snippets of Jyotish, especially Krishnamurti Padati in the latter years, but he never gave to anybody ever again anything like the energy and the time that he gave to Hart. It was like, like a love relationship where this is my one and only. I'm here for this person.
That's the magic. That's the juice of any Jyotish practice is the teacher-student relationship and the affection and the purity that comes from that far surpasses the wealth of any knowledge, although the knowledge just seems to naturally emanate from the stories that you're telling me, that you can't help but when you're with a great Atman, a great soul like Mantriji, that some of that energy is going to rub off on you. And wow, what a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing.
Hart was always fond of saying, it's the Holy Trinity, is Guru, Shishya, and Shastra. Because they come together, student and teacher, for the purpose of deciphering the Shastra, the classic text. And, I challenge anybody to just pick up a Vedic classic text and read that and understand everything that is meant. It's just impossible. Even if you know Sanskrit. If you don't know Sanskrit, it's truly hopeless, because all you have to work with is a translation and a commentary courtesy of the translator. And unless they themselves are a total professional Jyotishi who have themselves been trained in the nuances of the language, that's one thing, and of the art/science of Jyotish, then you're not going to get it all. And that's what a guru is there for. It's like a zipped file, and the guru unzips it before your eyes and says, this is what is meant by this shloka, and the subtext of it is this. And if you don't know already from previous discussions that this particular element must always be present and you're aware of its presence in every shloka, then you're missing a vital ingredient. So the guru is there to sort of provide this training from ground zero right on up to the altitudes of the highest Jyotish. And without a teacher, nobody is going to get there, because it's too complex. It is a holy science, if you like, and it needs a guru to decipher.
No, definitely. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing these stories with us today. I think that, to me, I could probably just listen for hours. What I'm going to do, if it's okay, I will link your contact information in the description below. Anyone who wants to get in touch with you, I know you're doing readings. I believe you do some tutoring from time to time, and you do some workshops and classes as well. I've attended your Hasta class at Andrea's studio, I think it was 2 years ago, which was a great introduction.
Yeah, that was pretty abbreviated, but.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do in a short time frame, of course. Like you said, it's an ocean. That said, I do know that you're going to be presenting this year at the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference. And I wondered if you could be so kind as to give our listeners a little bit of a teaser in terms of what they will be learning. So, we talked about unlocking the secret of Shastra. So can you share a little bit more about your workshop and some of the details.
Yeah, so the subject of this workshop intensive is Amsha Vichara, which is the analysis of the amshas, the vargas, the so-called divisional or harmonic charts of Jyotish, of which there are, I always forget the number, but more than a dozen. And those in popular use are, the Navamsha, of course, is part and parcel of every Jyotish reading, and the Dashamsha and the Drakana and so many others. So there's a pro forma for analyzing these, and you see many people on Facebook, internet groups going at various Amsha analysis with a misunderstanding of how such charts are to be read. I say misunderstanding, perhaps that's cruel. Everybody is the product of their, whatever teaching they've been exposed to. This is a methodology that Hart has taught in this intermediate course, so-called intermediate, although it's pretty advanced for most people, of his trilogy program. And it comes courtesy of Sheshadri Iyer, who was an Indian astrologer, of the first half of the century, brilliant mathematical scholar who became fascinated with, basically Panchang principles, and wondered, why weren't astrologers making greater use of tithis, karanas, and especially the yogas of the Panchang. Anyway, he dovetailed his understanding, his practice, into the analysis of amshas and vargas, and came up with a protocol that is very sophisticated. I mean, there's something like 36 rules for the analysis of planets within the amshas or vicharas. Iyer would use it for what we would call static analysis. In other words, he would look at the drekana, the third divisional or third harmonic, to say, sort of blanket statements about the presence or absence of brothers or sisters, and qualitative, things to say about them. But his real shtick was in using the amshas in a dynamic capacity. So let's just stick with the drekana for the moment. He would look at the drekana, for instance, to comment about the changing circumstances of brothers and sisters over the course of a lifetime in concert with the evolution of the dasha sequence, and if necessary, to partition that for greater nuance into the bhukti series within each dasha. So it was more used on a dynamic basis rather than a static basis. Now that has immediate applicability when you roll back to what I said about if a practicing Jyotishi can learn to master the analysis and requisite consultation around these two perennial, subject matters of huge interest to humankind, relationships and career, which takes you to the D9 and the D10, Navamsha and Dashamsha, respectively. If you can learn to analyze them using the Iyer protocol, you can then look at accurate charts, because there's a wrinkle. As you know, the divisional charts are vulnerable to errors in time. So if your birth time is off by 15 minutes, your Navamsha could well have the wrong rising sign. Rising Navamsha is wrong.
Sure.
And and it gets worse with the higher harmonics. But if assuming the chart is accurate and or rectified, then you can do wonderful things with the amshas. And so in the case of the Navamsha, you're going to look at the dasha sequence and see, let's say if the person's in sun dasha, now they're 20 years old and they're marriageable age, and now what lies immediately before them is sun dasha, moon dasha, and Mars dasha. Let's say that takes us through 6 plus 10 plus 7, the next 23 years. So from age 20 to 43, most likely to get married, right? What's the prognosis for marriage or happy relationship within these next 3 dashas? You've got to look at sun, moon, and Mars in the Navamsha, judge whether it be well placed by positive, negative, or neutral house. whether it be strong or weak by, its own sign, exaltation, debilitation, whether it's under affliction by malefics or eroded by malefics, and a bunch of other wrinkles as well, too, which, we won't try to get into now in this overview, but there's a bunch of other subsidiary rules. But the idea is to look at that and say, Sun Dasha will be very disappointing for you. There will be no relationship. So from age 20 to 26, devote yourself to your studies, date if you will, don't make any marriage commitments, just hang tough. Come Moon Dasha, age 26 to 36, this is the period. And during that Moon Dasha, Mars Bhukti is very good. So it will be during Moon Dasha, Mars Bhukti, you will be age 28, roughly, doing mental math here. That will be the year you will meet the person and you will fall suddenly in love. It will be a love relationship, not an arranged marriage by your parents. You will fall in love with this person. And away you go. And, similar things with Dashamsha and predicting, the likely prognosis for career. Now, as hard as always quick to say, I'm only as good as a weatherman. What's the weatherman's score of accuracy? Yeah, 70% or so. I mean, he says this jokingly, of course, but it's also the reality check too, right? This is really a holy art or science. And as Mantriji used to say, this is God's work. To take a two-dimensional diagram and interpret it as a four-dimensional life, says that's divine work, and God guards it jealously. So if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. So it's not easy. It's difficult. There are rules and there's practice in your own intuition. But without a protocol, without a pro forma to follow, you're really wandering lost in the woods. At least with this, you've got you're armed with a compass and a map. You've got a sense of where you are and where you're trying to go. And Hart's fond of saying this stuff works 70% of the time. You might say, well, I'm going to hold out for something that works 100% of the time. Well, good luck. Good luck. We start where we can and work with what we've got. And most of us are just thrilled and beholden to him to have received, a detailed, thorough education in this subject so that we can apply it in our own work, gain experience, work it out with clients, and observe over time to see, our own confidence grow in using this. So that's what will be covered in that particular workshop intensive on this year's virtual Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference.
That's fantastic. Sign me up for that, definitely. So anyway, well, it was a pleasure to have you today on our, on this video. And, if anyone has any questions or comments, they can leave them in the description below, and either I or by extension contact to respond. We'd be happy to do that. So, and I'll also leave your contact information as well as the link for the Sedona virtual conference for 2020.
Yeah, great idea. Dennis will appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. And I hope to have you again sometime soon. We can talk more Jyotish.
Okay, my pleasure, Joey. Thanks again for this.
Take care.